Great. Hello, everyone. And today I have a living legend. That's how I call Bob Emiliani, who is
Too kind.
one of my favorite people on the planet. I'm so, yeah, sorry that I was born later than I couldn't meet Dr. Deming, right? But I'm so glad
Mm.
that I am still living in the era where I can meet Bob Emiliani, because Bob always been for me such yeah, inspiration and a, a voice which is so raw and truthful that you just can't hear him. So Bob, welcome to the CEO World Record interview.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today.
Amazing. So tell us a bit, not a bit, like yeah, that's a wrong start. Tell us a lot about the impact you are living for.
Well, so for many, many years now, and 25 years or so, something like that, my focus has been to find ways for organizations to improve leadership, the management and leadership of the organization. And I've always strived to do something different in terms of my formulations of what improved leadership and management would look like, and striving to not simply repackage or reformulate what other people have done, but to develop unique thinking along these lines, and something that is, it builds upon the work of others, of course, but it represents unique thinking, a unique synthesis of ideas and so forth, to try to deliver to people simpler solutions for improving the leadership and management of organizations. Because many of these solutions are complicated, difficult for people to remember, difficult for people to practice once they're away from the training session, or difficult for people to sustain, months and years after the training session and so on. So fundamentally, it is to better understand leadership and management and find ways that practice practical ways that leaders and managers and organizations can improve what they do without, in recognizing all their other responsibilities and the things that they need to do. So always being mindful of their reality, and trying to fit
Mhm,
in with that reality, but yet move things forward.
mhm. If you could
So yeah,
continue,
no,
Bob.
go on.
I know, like for me, but I'm just speaking from my own, experience and my own bias. Like, I've got, I believe, all of the answers why something is not working within leadership and management, whatever we call it, right? Lean systems thinking, it doesn't really matter.
Hmm.
I've got it from your work, a lot from the books you wrote, especially yeah, the Trump of classical management. That was something that was, it's just an epic book, and insights
Thank you.
as well from Deming and Goldratt and other kind of systems thinkers back in the past. And I am not, like myself, I'm not looking anymore like why this is happening, because it was a
Hmm.
period in life where I started this endeavor because I was curious, why is this happening? So
Hmm.
could you elaborate on, I know that you probably did as well. That's my assumption. So could you
Yeah.
elaborate, like where in your journey you had this, this curiosity for why, and how do you feel with the answers, yeah, of your work today, the ones you revealed, the why and where you are going forward with all of
Yep.
that?
Okay. Well, it started out, working in industry, and realizing, fairly early on, I came into industry as an individual contributor and so forth, and was soon promoted to supervisor. And you take a couple of courses that the company offers about supervision, but kind of not enough. So I started to research leadership and management on my own, and to gain additional information to better function in this position. Then I became team leader of a very large project and realized, I'm kind of out of my element here. All my degrees are in engineering. I'm an introverted person, and highly so. and just had to figure out how to, rise to the occasion in these kind of positions. And then I got promoted to a manager, and then promoted another time to, the lower levels of executive world. And so throughout this time, I was, reading and learning and applying what I learned. So I have like a, a system of, read it, think about it, apply it, make an adjustment, and so forth. And through this process, also fairly early on, I became trained in the Toyota production system and the Toyota way. And so this was an alternative, a different way of leading and managing an organization compared to what I had experienced in the prior 8 or 9 years of my work experience. And I was very much enamored with this TPS and Toyota way as a better way to lead and manage an organization. It's not perfect and so forth, but it was substantially better than what I termed at the time conventional management, or in more recent years I refer to as classical management, which is kind of it's the old way of doing things, the typical way of doing things. If I'm a CEO of a company and I need some advice, I talk to another CEO, and chances are they're going to tell me the kinds of things that they learned from other CEOs. And so there's this sort of legacy of kind of doing things the same way as today as has been done in the past. And so I did a lot of work for many years to understand, what is a lean leader? How does a lean leader think? How does a lean leader behave? And so forth. So I wrote many books and papers about this topic of lean leadership, which at the time that I started with this, nobody was looking at it. So this was
Mm-hmm.
1994, and people were very enamored with what were known as lean tools and so forth, but didn't care really about lean leadership, which was the only thing that fascinated me really about this, because I could see as me and my peer group of managers are being trained in this stuff, that some were responding differently, like I was. We got to change how we're doing things to lead better, whereas others were just leading the same way. And so that intrigued me as to how we could both undergo this same training. And some people had a big impact and resulted in changes in how they led and managed, and others no impact. And so that got me started on this. But what was apparent concurrently was that a lot of companies were struggling with this so-called lean transformation. So the word lean became the sort of generic term for TPS and the Toyota, well, TPS anyway initially, not the Toyota
Mm-hmm.
way yet. And so why were companies having such difficulty with this? And so I, was always aware of this, but didn't get around to really starting to really research and write about it until 2007. So the prior years from 1994 to 2007 were focused on, what is a lean leader? How do they behave? How do they think? What do they do? And so on. And then starting around 2007, why isn't this working out so well? We don't see the changes in leadership thinking, the changes in leadership behaviors, the change in leadership practices. The overall management of the organization is exactly the same as it all, more or less exactly the same as it always has been. And what's preventing this so-called lean transformation? Companies going from the old way of doing things to a new way of doing things, and pretty much where everything would change, in that going from one to the other, almost
Mm-hmm.
everything would end up changing. And so why is this not happening? So anyway, started doing research on this, and part of it was, answering my own questions.
Mm-hmm.
Always just curiosity, starting with why do we're being trained the same way? How come some leaders are leading differently and others aren't? And carrying that forward through time to the point of understanding why most leaders think the same way, do the same things, make the same decisions, and so on. And part of this involved me developing a course where we would analyze failed management decisions, such as, big things that people might know about is the Boeing 737 Max
Mm.
crashes, and other types of corporate calamities that happen, pretty much worldwide. A lot of it is, U.S. centric, because I draw upon U.S. and also
Yeah.
U.K. Newspapers for material. Anyway, so in doing in that course, when you start to collect the data from students and so forth who work for a living, they're not just undergraduates with no work experience. You start to find these common themes of the same types of illogical thinking, same types of cognitive biases, same types of untested beliefs, beliefs, same types of beliefs and
Mhm.
untested assumptions. And then you start to read about the history of, of
Mhm.
organizations and things like the history of ancient Egypt. And this is really the first, the oldest civilization that documented things really well. And you read this stuff and you find, wow, leaders today, whether they're political leaders or leaders of companies, whether they're nonprofits or for profit, whatever, wow, they tend to do the same kind of things that were going on in ancient Egypt 6,000, 5,000, 6,000 years ago. And so anyway, this stuff all, find very interesting that it is so difficult to move forward from these things and make the kinds of leaps that need to be made, especially given the kinds of situations we now face in the world today. And so a lot of my
Mhm.
writing since 2018 has been to uh, um, characterize this lack of change for the better. Um, you may have heard the phrase, "The more things change, the more they stay the same."
They stay the
This is a
same.
phrase from Alphonse Karr, yeah, in 1848. And many people notice it. You leave a company and you talk to people who are still working there 10 years later, and you find out things are still the same. 20 years later, things are still the same. And so what I've done in my work is to examine this from different aspects: a social aspect, a spiritual aspect, a aesthetic aspect, from the aspect of preconceptions and so forth, to try to look at this problem from different directions, not just
Mhm.
one direction, and to try to do a bunch of work with just that one direction. No, it's do work looking at this from different directions because there's different causality associated with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I am so thrilled with the way you think. 'Cause let me just tell that uh the way I kind of see you, that you are aware of your own bias, and you keep on keep on digging, or revealing another a new angle, a new perspective, and just linking those dots and connecting.
Yep.
And that's why just following the way you think, the way you evolve, is just in itself so rewarding, for anyone who is, whether in the management and as well leadership position. And the what struck me when we talked now, when you talked, it is, I recently come, maybe for the last 2 weeks, yeah, 2 to 3 weeks, while I'm doing this world record, I'm
Hmm.
like every morning listening to, oh, what's his name, Doctor, I know this last name, Dispenza, like he's a
Hmm.
psychologist and US based doctor. So what he's speaking about so vividly, it links back to this Egyptian kind of, linkage of what
Hmm.
you've been telling, that he is telling that our body carries the memory of
Hmm.
our past, and
Yeah.
our brain is not even aware of that body's memory. And that was something like a completely new angle for me. And he
Hmm.
was like saying that if we made in the past certain decisions, I mean, there is a moment in time when we want to make new decisions, and even if we are aware that we have to make, like, it needs to be new decisions, or we have to come out of the
Yeah.
comfort zone. Like very often, we still end up, our body end up
Hmm.
guiding our mind rather than vice versa. um yeah, so that was something like really for me, like a deep insight, which I never ever thought, that there is a memory in our
Yeah.
body based. Yeah, and then this new decision making process, which we think is new, it's actually very rarely new.
Yep.
And what he speaks about, because then people asking him, like what should we then do, as humans. And what he speaks about is mostly what I already hear, the pattern of so many CEOs participating in this interviewing process of CEO world record. It is being in silence, pausing, kind of going back to, redefining your own identity, and start questioning, is that me? Who is that doing
Yeah.
doing these things, and who is pulling the string right now? So it's yeah, so it's the silence and the pause and kind of reset, and then from that stepping forward. But where I wanna go now, do the segue towards the future, because but before that, Bob, do you feel you got answered the why?
Yeah, I'm actually very satisfied with the why of why we don't see the kind of change in leadership and management of organizations that you would expect to see with the passage of time, with the changing of existential circumstances and so on, and why we are on a you know it's called path dependence, why we keep doing things today and in the future as we have done them in the past with very little change. And so to understand these things, you know, um, all my degrees are in engineering, and I basically had to answer these questions. You don't find the answers in the engineering world. You don't find it in um, the management world. You don't find it in the organizational behavior world. You don't find this either really so much in the psychology world, which is surprising, but but the general social science and economics world. I
Mm,
realize psychology is a social science, but I mean the non-psychology social science part of things and economics. And what you end up finding is that these are essentially political problems. And as a political
mm,
problem, you need to look in the political realm. So anyway, I've had to spend years and years educating myself as a social scientist to be able to make headway into understanding why these things. So I feel very comfortable, which is I think an important thing to touch upon
mhm,
for a moment is people are very frustrated with leaders and managers. They always have been. And if they read my work, people will understand why things are the way they are. Now, we may not like why things are the way they are, but at least you'll understand why things are the way they are. And when you understand that, you are calmer, you're more relaxed. You also are better able to think, okay, given these kinds of constraints, what can I creatively do to move things forward? Knowing that
mm,
these constraints, because if you don't know the constraints, your ideas are blind. You're moving forward in a blind way. You don't understand what the constraints are. So now you're better able to think about ways to move forward. So it's really a lot of this is not just to satisfy my own curiosity, but share my journey of understanding
yeah.
these things with others and help relieve some of their mental anguish, their stress, their struggles, and so on, so they can live a better life, both at work and
Mm.
at home, because we bring our work problems home.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And now speaking about those constraints, because I know that there will be listeners who might not, read some of your work, and the biggest ones, like the ones who are, if we remove those, that would be the leverage to enlarge the pie, as you say, right? And really
Mm.
have the a win-win, kind of impact driven, wealth producing, business, or ecosystem, whatever we call it. What would be the key ones, if that's even possible to ask in this way?
Well, one of the things that drives leaders to maintain the status quo is the status, the rights, and privileges that they have of leaders, and whether they know it or not, preservation of their own self-interest ends up preserving what I call the institution of leadership and the system of profound privilege. So as you elevate into these positions, you are learning how to think a certain way, how to make certain decisions, or what those decisions should be, and so on. And this actually all begins very early in life because
Mm-hmm.
if you're in youth sports, well, take your home life. You have two managers at home, parents. You have one or two managers at home. They are your parents, and you learn at very early on, the age of 1.5 or 2, what to do, what not to do. And then in youth sports, you have a team manager. That's a
Yeah.
manager. They're teaching you management anyway. But as you get into a company and you start to rise into the levels, you start to further understand that there's certain ways of thinking and doing things, which also relate back to your youth sport coach and your parents, and going way, and your teachers in school and so on. And so there is this tendency over time to preserve one's rights and privileges and to make decisions that, for many people in companies at the lower levels, they'll say that doesn't make any sense. But the
Mm,
decision that the people at lower levels are unaware of is that the factors that are taken into account that preserve leaders' rights and privileges and so on, and their honor and their dignity, and et cetera. And this stuff is just very well documented over time when it comes to the
mm.
history of kingships and so forth.
So that would be like the key one, or for holding them back to, yeah, to
Yeah,
maintain, yeah, maintaining status quo. I
yeah.
call it
Well, one of the
manipulation.
yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things that we've learned from the Toyota, management system and
Mhm.
its westernized derivative lean world is that in order for leaders to become the so-called lean leader, you have to give up some rights and privileges.
Mhm.
And that's not a lot of rights and privileges that you have to give up. It's actually, very few in number and a very small amount. But what we found is that most leaders, even this very few in number and very small amount of rights and privileges that are not necessarily given up, but just sort of reduced a little bit, they're not very interested in that. And
Mhm.
so, we've been not very successful in having just the many, many so-called lean leaders that we thought we would see back in the, late 80s and early 90s, that we thought we would see by now. And so
Mhm.
so understanding the metaphysical aspects of this, the preconceptions, the mythologies that support this, the aesthetic aspect that supports this, which is really unusual. I mean, nobody writes about the aesthetics of leadership and
Well,
management.
can we talk about that?
And
Because
then
that's
and
where
then
I
the
would.
social
Mhm.
and
Sorry,
then the
Bob.
social
Mhm.
aspects of how leaders have to look in front of others and so on.
Oh, yeah. Can we reveal the aesthetic kind of angle when you speak about, yeah, this, I don't know, aesthetic constraints or aesthetic status quo elements? What do you have in mind?
Well, generally it involves how things are supposed to look or how they should look or the
Mhm.
preferred way that things should look. So, for example, one of the ways that things should look like is the leader doesn't show up to the workplace where and interact with the people who actually do the work. Things are not supposed to look that way. That's the wrong aesthetic for the leader to go to the
Yeah,
workplace.
Bob,
If they
right.
do go to the workplace, there's an entourage. There's the leader's assistant, and then maybe another assistant, and some vice presidents, and so forth. And they must all go together to show a certain look. They may dress a certain way. And they will certainly speak a certain way and in a certain jargon and so forth. So there's an entire aesthetic that surrounds leadership
Mhm.
and management that that um, that very few leaders are willing to break that aesthetic and break out of those aesthetics and do something different or be seen differently than others, because you get alienated in your peer group.
Mhm.
If you
Yeah. Mhm.
think a different way than others,
You'll
and
be
do things
rejected.
different than, yeah, you're
Yeah.
rejected. And if you're not rejected, you're just sort of pushed to the side, or your influence is reduced or something like that. You're still CEO or whatever, but your CEO peer group thinks you're kind of an odd person, and you may be involved in some of the social activities. And then when you talk about, to other CEOs, well, you really should be doing things this way or that way because it's more effective or less of a struggle for everybody and so forth. They don't really listen to you. They look at you kind of funny, like, well, that's you. You won't work here.
Mhm.
You're different, and so on. So there's all these excuses for preserving the status quo. And one of the things I tell people is who don't like the way leaders lead and how managers lead is, you need to think about all the generations of leaders and managers who, when they were at the bottom of the organization, didn't like that either, but then they became supervisors, managers, executives, and then they lead that exact same way that they don't like. So
Yeah.
why is this happening? You know, and so that's what I, write about, why this stuff is happening and why this aesthetic, among other things, is preserved as time goes
Mm.
by. And yeah, there's some changes. You saw, the work from home thing in COVID, but now you also see most managers saying, okay, I want you back in the office and it's non-negotiable to my
Oh yeah.
terms, whether it's 5 days a week or 3 days a week or whatever it happens to be, and not differentiating between the people who can do work effectively at home and those. Then there are some people who need to be at work 5 days a week because that's the nature of the job. But just sort of the blanket, the typical leadership thing says, it's this way. I'm telling you why. I don't have to give you the reasons.
Yeah.
This is just what I want, and that's it. Comply or leave.
Yeah, comply or leave. Yeah, the reason why I wanted you to explain the aesthetic kind of angle is that it's as well something, it's yeah, as you say, we never think from that kind of perspective. And where I got my memory, um, where for the first time I met that, it is when I've sold my own manufacturing company, where it was created from zero by my own thoughts and from my own
Mm-hmm.
money and these type of things. I went to work for the bank as one of the, let's say, executives. And there was the moment I remember, the first day at work, when I signed the contract, and then they said, this is the amount of payment you're gonna get. These are all of the bonuses. And then they handled a Honda car keys. This is your Honda, like outside the window. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember sitting and feeling the level of stress I never felt, that
Mm.
level of stress as I felt running my own company with 60 people. I was very
Yeah.
young back then. And
Yeah.
and my first kind of question was like, how on earth I'm gonna make sure that I am not a minus in this branch, because I thought, I don't know the industry. I have zero network. I just got from Denmark to Lithuania, and they're
Mm-hmm.
paying me this money, what the fuck, what for? I just
Yeah.
couldn't get
Yeah. Yeah.
that. And so I remember having that. Yeah, it was really overwhelming, like a lot of stress from that angle
Mm-hmm.
for me. So I went from the office. I went instantly to the where all the clients were coming, and just sitting there and just observing the process, not for blaming or something, just for learning, because I really wanted to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and when it comes to peers, I do remember people like other executives, they were watching me and saying like, what are you doing? You just came from Scandinavia. I mean, is that a style of leading? Where are your
Mm-hmm.
nails? Where are your earrings? Like, where are your high heels? And other executives were
Yeah.
speaking. But
Yeah.
what even was worse, every time we've been going to headquarters, they would gather all the executives to come to headquarters and to just spend a day there. And it was the first time I went, and we spent like half of the day. I mean, I've spent listening, and they've spent talking about how badly people are performing. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, it just, I just felt so much conflict within me. I thought, I'm not gonna stay there. So this is where my why started coming out. I just couldn't get it.
Yeah.
I just really couldn't get it. But speaking now about the future, Bob. Now, when
Mm.
the answers of why, let's say for now, right, for this time of being, are answered
Yeah.
from multiple angles, where do you see your impact going further?
Um, well, that's a good question. One of the things that interests me lately, and I might do a little bit of writing about this, or I might do something simpler than that. But you see on social media, for example, all the time what leaders should be. Leaders should do this, leaders should do that, and so forth. And people lack an understanding of what I call the institution of leadership and system of profound privilege. And so, you could read all these books, okay, but I'm also just thinking about doing something a little bit more concise that says, what leadership is. In other words, there's a gap between current state and future state, and everybody focuses on future state. Here's what leaders should be like. Here's what they should do, and so forth. But these ideas of what they should be and so forth really don't make any sense and don't even matter if you don't understand the starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of these things you're asking leaders to take big leaps um, out of the status quo, which most leaders are not willing to do. Um, so they people just don't have a good understanding of the nature of the institution of leadership and system of profound privilege. So anyway, I'm just thinking a little bit about that. Other than that, though, I'm
Mm-hmm.
basically trying to make more people aware of my work and to understand that the two sides, the TPS Toyota way, lean management way of managing an organization, as well as kind of the current state of leadership, the lay of the land, but also just trying to get people more in tune with the understanding of the current state of leadership, because all of these things you see on social media are like, nice things to say, but it doesn't result in any change of, you know, it's just
I know.
fluff. It's just fluff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, so
Okay.
people need to
Mm-hmm.
really start to think about substance versus fluff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
well,
anyway,
I love that, and that's one of the reasons why we do the world record. It is to attract those integral, ethical, just human centered
yep,
leaders, entrepreneurs. I don't really care who they are, status wise, but together with them, like, yeah, do the hard work. It is a hard work. It starts from within, and and stay with them and grow together, and yeah, and at least bring some cases to to maybe to fill that gap at certain extent.
hmm
Yeah, and the last question, Bob.
yeah,
Let's imagine I mean, we all will die, and we will be born again, and you are born again 100 years later, maybe not as a Bob, but let's say
yeah.
as someone else, right? What would you like, how would you like to see the leadership, management, the business working differently?
Well, I think we would like to see it evolve more in the next 100 years than it has in the past 100 years, or the past several hundred years, or the past, you know,
Don't
5,000
tell.
years. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting for people to think about is it's only 17 generations to the time of Henry VIII, the 1500s, and it's only 170 generations from the, ancient Egypt. And when we think about it that way, it's much easier to comprehend the idea that, what you touched upon earlier, that the way we think and do things today is very much like the way the ancient Egyptian leaders and particularly since we're talking about leadership, how they thought about things and how they did things. And so I think if we recognize that legacy and how they thought about things and did things might have been good for the times of ancient Egypt and might have been good, let's say, good times in Henry VIII. But um, we're in a very different time from even 120 years ago. You can just say pre-automobile, you know, pre-radio. This stuff wasn't that long ago, and so we've come a long way in just the last 120 years or so. And we're in a very different environment, and people have different expectations, whether you're a worker or a citizen, uh, whatever the case, or a child. Very different expectations, today, and really in the since about 1980, starting the emergence of very different expectations because of a much changed
Mm.
workplace, much changed world in the last 50 years or so, 40 or 50 years. And so, that'll continue for the next 100 or more years with people having some different expectations. Or why are we leading the same way as, King Tut or Henry
So you
VIII?
would basically want to see it that it would happen faster, right, Bob?
Well, I think everybody wants it to happen faster, but the reality is it's a centuries long process. And if you begin with modern progressive management with Frederick Taylor and scientific management, which is people complain about a lot, but they don't understand what his objectives were and so forth. But anyway, the
Mm.
larger objectives that he was interested in, which was benefits for not just companies but for workers as well and society as well. We start with that, that was the late 1800s. We've gone through the 1900s. Now we're in the 2000s, and so this starts the third century of that. So maybe by the end of the third century, we have something much better. But what are the
Yeah, let's
odds of
hope
that?
for
That
that.
would be hard. Yeah, hope
Let's
for
hope
that.
for
But
that. Yeah.
there's a 5,000 or more year history. I mean, it probably goes back to the beginning of agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
which is when um, probably a real type of leadership emerged as opposed to a pre-agriculture. You had people who were influential, such as priests, but not necessarily leaders.
Leader.
So
Yeah.
probably around
Yeah.
the time of agriculture. So that would be about 10, 12,000 years ago. So, things have been the same for a long time in certain ways. Obviously, not everything's the same, of course, but
Yeah.
in certain
Okay.
aspects of leadership and management have
Okay.
been the same.
So yeah, it's I see that. I see the impact you are doing, and I just really want to acknowledge all the, it is an effort. It requires to be your commitment, and to be anchored to something bigger than your maybe lifetime either, because neither you, neither
Right.
I, neither many others, mostly, or we don't know, but speaking, going back to the arguments you mentioned, yeah, it takes a lot of time, and awareness. So having you being able to share that, and keep on writing and sharing is just, as you say, it gives us the understanding where we are, and why it's been the way it's been like
Mm-hmm.
that, and then understanding that, it gives, peace of mind, and then it gives, I believe, as well, compassion, and kind of, you know
Mm-hmm.
seeing around, and direction, and even understanding why CEOs or any leaders behave the way they behave. Then I think if I would be, an employee or team member, it would encourage me to take bigger, wider responsibility from, like from love, because I understand, right? So your work is just really, really profound. Bob,
Well,
thank you so much for being with
if I
us.
could say one last quick thing,
Yeah,
I think
of course.
hopefully in the evolution of leadership and management, that leaders soon start to realize that their work could be less difficult and less struggle if they were to make some small changes.
I
And that would
believe
be
so
good for
too.
their health, for their well-being as leaders. And it's not just all about the health and well-being of the followers,
Yeah,
but the leaders as well. So anyway,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
it's been a pleasure, Laura. I really thank you for inviting me today.
It's been a pleasure for us, Bob. So see you around.
Yes.